Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook. If this is your first time listening to an episode of Harmonious World, then especially welcome to you. This podcast is inspired by a Quincy Jones quote. Imagine what a harmonious world it would be if everyone shared a little of what they are good at. In the last 5 years, I've interviewed a lot of musicians and those with an interest in music about what helps them make the world a little more harmonious. Alongside Harmonious World, you can find album and live reviews on hilaryseabrook.co.uk. What you're listening to now is pianist Talon Smith. His album debut is out now, and it includes his own compositions, 24 Preludes, which is Opus 1, and the Sonata in C minor, Opus 2. What you're listening to now is Movement 1 of the Sonata in C minor, Con Favore. But I hope you enjoy listening to this and to my conversation with Talon Smith. Well, welcome, and we're going to talk about Debut, your debut album.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. One of the things I really enjoy about this is speaking to people when they're kind of quite early in their journey.
Okay.
Because then I can go, oh, well, of course, I spoke to him early. Get a very smug feeling.
It's fun.
Yeah. So tell me about the album. So it's got 24 preludes on it and the sonata in 3 movements. So when did you compose all of this?
Let's see. The preludes, if I remember rightly, they were finished in 2022. Yes. So that was actually interesting because most of the preludes were written with that set in mind, but a few of them were based off of some ideas I'd written down years ago and never really, finished. I knew that I wanted to use them at some point. Sometimes we do that, we write down ideas and then we come back to them. So that's what I did with a few of them. So that was fun to kind of see that come together. And then of course, like I said, most of it was new material for the preludes specifically. And then the sonata, let's see, I finished that in 2023, the year following. Yeah. And it was kind of funny because the plan originally to record the music, I only was going to be recording the preludes, but then I finished the sonata in time, right, to learn it and then record it for this album. So I ended up combining them, and I'm glad I did. It feels more like an album length. With the preludes, it would have been like a half an hour, and that seems maybe a little short. So
yes, and also I think it's really nice to hear the shorter pieces and then the extended. I love sonata, the sonata format, because you can, usually it's a sort of fairly fast opening and then a slow middle and then something really like exciting at the end. But they're very different, but they're sort of longer than the preludes. And I really like the fact that we've got both on this album.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad too. It was good that it worked out that way.
Yeah. Did you always have 24 preludes in mind, or did that just happen to be the amount that you wrote?
Well, yeah, it was the plan was for 24, and it was kind of, there's this joke I would tell audiences when I was performing the preludes on tour a few years ago. I would say, I'd talk about how Bach did his Well-Tempered Clavier with the 48 preludes and fugues, all the major minor keys. And then Chopin came along and did his 24 preludes. And then we had Rachmaninoff and Scriabin and Debussy, all these people doing 24 preludes. And so I said, well, as a composer, I wanted to join the club. And so the idea was, I certainly, I want to do my own take on this genre. And so, it's arranged similarly to a few composers did it the same way. I think Chopin did it this way, Scriabin did it this way, where it's major, minor, and then it goes through the circle of fifths. So I started with the C major and ended in the D minor. And I think that works well for those harmonies flow into each other naturally in that pattern. So it made sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I interview quite a lot of jazz musicians, and that the circle of fifths is such a fascinating thing because, it's like there are only 12 notes, we all know there are only 12 notes, and yet there's so much music. But
Right.
also that circle of fifths is really interesting. And I think if you don't know music, if you don't understand the technicalities of music theory, that doesn't make sense, except that when you hear it, it kind of does.
Right. Right. Because of the way, I don't know, the way we're programmed to hear chords. We hear certain
Yeah.
chords and they go into other ones just because that's the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, actually, funnily enough, what I would like to play now is I'd like to play a bit of number three,
Okay.
because I really like number three. It's G major. It's the vivace.
Yeah.
It's it's really virtuosic. Did you compose them in order, or did you just sort of assemble them? How did the inspiration come for each of them, but then also specifically for this G major vivace one?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about the G major first and I'll talk about assembling. So the G major, that was a fun one. I wrote it, well, the time signature changes all the time. It opens in a 7/8, but then it will go into 5/4 a few times. And basically, it's a, I don't know. Again, I think, yeah, when you're assembling something like that. So you asked me, did I write them in order? No, I actually didn't. And it surprises me in hindsight almost because I would have expected before writing a set like this that you would write it in order because it has to make sense in a linear progression of time. But it didn't work that way for mine. Like I said, some of the preludes, a few of them were based off of old material. So I mean those years ago, and they weren't in order. And then the first one I wrote specifically for this set was number 20, which was the C minor prelude. I don't remember I don't remember the order in which I wrote the third prelude. I don't remember that. But the first one for this set was the 20, number 20. And what I found was obviously you want to think on a large scale. You also have to think on a really small scale. Each prelude has to be really well balanced. You've got a miniature, and so the balance of the structure of that is going to be a lot more pronounced because it's so small. Extra measure, you're going to feel the extra measure that doesn't need to be there. You're going to feel that it's too short if it needs more time, etc. So, but then in terms of assembling it, I found that often I could simply rely on the fact that, I'd have a prelude and I'd consider what came before it and I'd consider what came after it. And if those three worked well, that was a good section. And then it'd almost be like assembling backwards and forwards in a way. And then I would have some sections that were not connected and I'd connect them with another section. So it was actually really fun. It was almost like putting a puzzle together in a way.
Yeah, and it's funny because maths and music go so well together,
Yeah.
and because there's something logical about so much about music. And one of the things that I really like about modern contemporary classical music, the same way, and I think it's true of jazz as well, is that you can have a really, really strict structure and format and all the rest of it, but that doesn't stop the creativity
I,
being like intense sometimes.
yeah. I think sometimes even the structure augments the creativity. It gives you a form to fill out. It gives you a frame to build on. And it's really fun how that works.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's one of the things when I started this podcast, I was kind of like, oh, well, I'll talk about classical music and I'll talk about jazz. And but actually you can't separate them like that. I think, Gershwin would be writing differently today if he'd been born, 80 years later or whatever. And I
Yep.
think that that whole thing about contemporary classical music and where it sits now along, and it can sit alongside a solo jazz. Your music could sit quite happily alongside a solo jazz album.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and actually that kind of is a compliment. I love the fact that the composition process does not take away the creativity. Just because you're writing something down doesn't mean it's less creative than an improvised piece.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. It's just different expression, but it's all creativity.
Yeah. Can you talk to my listeners a little bit about your background, because you're still quite young, but so what's your musical background?
Sure. My musical background is in the house growing up. I listened to classical music a lot, just since as long as I can remember. So I developed a passion for that. As you know, again, as long as I can remember, I've always loved it. I've loved the emotional complexity, the uh, really the brilliance that goes into creating those masterworks. Let's see. I started musical training when I was around 4 years old. I was actually not originally a pianist. I was a violinist. And I also sang in a children's choir. But yeah, I started learning the violin when I was 4. And then when I was 5, I began learning the piano. And I liked the violin, but I definitely gravitated toward the piano. Now I don't, years ago I stopped playing the violin, and now I recognize, people say you got to start an instrument young, and now I know why, because a couple years ago I picked up a violin. I couldn't get my arm around, the wrist didn't, it's not flexible
Yeah.
that way anymore. It works differently. So anyway, yeah, I started playing then. I was 5. I loved it. I learned quickly, just because it was exciting. It was fun, and then creating that music for myself. I started composing when I was 8. I had been improvising before that, but I started actually writing it down when I was 8. And, uh, you know, all I can say beyond that is, we musicians, we're always growing, we're always learning more. We never stop at any point, and we're always developing. We're always coming into our own, essentially. And it's just a really fun and rewarding process. Growing into those depths of music, it's so rich. There's a lot to
Yeah.
be experienced there.
Yeah. So where did your formal tuition go? Because I mean, obviously, if you've started composing at 8,
Mhm.
that you must have been a nightmare for a piano teacher and for a composition teacher, because you knew so much already. So did you go into formal? Did you go to music college? What did you do?
Right. Well, I never ended up taking lessons for composition. I would, at times when I'd finish a piece, I'd take it to my teacher and they'd have some ideas for me, but I never took formal compositional training. I just kind of went with it. As far as piano went, I've worked with many different teachers, and I've had a lot of really good teachers. My first teacher was amazing because he was funny story. He was just really good at teaching the student. And one of the things that I had when I was young, and I mean I can still do it now, but it was more of a problem when I was young, is I could play by ear. And so the problem was, I started out with those method books with the CDs in the back with how the songs went, and so I would listen to the song, and I wouldn't have to look at the music anymore. You know,
Yeah.
so I wasn't. I needed to learn to read music. So finally, he told my mom, you have to forbid him from listening to any of this music, because otherwise he's not going to, he's not going to learn to read the sheet music. And so I guess it's just things like that. Like you would expect, like some teachers might be exasperated. He wasn't. He just knew how to work with me. He
Right.
knew, you know, and a good teacher does that. A good teacher adapts to the student and finds out what the student's needs are. And yeah, I mean, I never attended a music college either. I've worked with professors at conservatories, but I never attended one as a regular student. No.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I feel that I've really benefited from my experience in music education not being, I don't know, I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of different people because I didn't attend a conservatory and wasn't set into like
Yeah.
that. And I feel like I learned more that way. But other people, I think, probably uh, would like that more of that structure in their life. So I think it just depends on what you need. I'm just grateful. I feel like I had a good path. So
Yeah, I mean, and clearly it's led you to this, and it's really lovely to have this album as a sort of moment in time.
thanks. Yeah.
So you talked about playing these pieces touring,
Yeah.
to concert in concerts and things. So what's next? Where are you going to take these now?
These particular pieces, I mean, I'm sure I'll be performing them again at some point. The idea right now is I'm working on some new compositions, finishing those up, and then to tour with those, to record those at some point. Just, continuing to produce. Producing material is important. So that's part of developing as the artist is you're growing and you're creating new things. So, I'm sure I'll revisit those at some point, but right now I'm kind of working on some new projects. So I'm excited to release those at some point pretty soon.
Excellent. That's exciting. Do you
Thanks.
do you play solo piano sort of almost exclusively, or do you collaborate with other people?
I love collaborating. I think that just because solo concerts are the easiest type to
Yeah.
organize, I think, by default I play more solo, but I love chamber music. I love playing with orchestras. It's all part of the experience. And in some ways it's actually even more fun when it's not just you and when you're creating something with someone else at the same time. But everything has its strengths. I would say, when you're playing solo, you have the most artistic freedom. You don't have to coordinate an interpretation with anyone. But when you do coordinate interpretation, like in chamber or an orchestra, everyone's minds are coming together, and you can create something better than one person would have got by themselves. So
Right. So
it's all just fun.
well, I am very excited to see where this journey takes you and see what you come up with next.
Thank you. I'm excited too. We're going to be figuring that out together, I think.
Absolutely. Well, keep me posted and come back on this when we've got something new to talk about.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Talon Smith. His album debut is out now. What you're listening to right now is the final prelude, number 24, the D minor, and it's con fuoco. Talon really is a virtuoso pianist, and it was really good to talk to him about the composition process. I look forward to hearing what he's up to next. But thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World, and don't forget to follow the links in the show notes for album and live gig reviews. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.